What's up, everybody? It's Joe with the Real Momentum Podcast, episode number 10, I believe. And if I'm being honest, this is probably the episode I'm most excited about. I've been waiting for this one for a couple of months. Good friend of mine, new friend that's become a good friend, Lindsay Mann, in Parker, Colorado. Yes. Lindsay, welcome. Thanks for hopping on.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Recovered from COVID. You got hit pretty hard.
I did. It kind of kicked my butt. Yeah, but I'm thankfully okay and feeling much better. So thank you.
Awesome. Well, let's do this. I'm working on a simple format for our podcast, and I like this idea. I was thinking about this yesterday. Let's talk about, because to me, you're a superhero, right? Like, I think what you're doing awesome things. You run a massive podcast, you run a massive business, you're a leader in the industry. So let's talk about three things. Your origin story, and I'm not this much of a geek, I promise. Your origin story, your superpower, and your weakness, your kryptonite. So let's talk about your origin story. How did you get into real estate? Like, how were you born and raised in Colorado? Like, what is the story of Lindsay Mann?
I am not much of a nerd, so I love the superhero idea. That's really fun. So I actually come to Colorado by way of California, pretty much like everybody else in the entire state of Colorado. But I've been here since I was 6. So when I moved here, my mom would take us to the Parade of Homes, which is, they don't do it the same anymore, but it was a showcase of the biggest homes, all the new technology, the best builders, and I fell in love with houses. I just couldn't believe the unbelievable homes that these builders were building and showcasing. So over the years, that kind of turned into this strange obsession with just visiting builder model homes. And I would sometimes go in there when I had nothing else to do on the weekends. And one day at 17, I walked into a builder model and I said to the woman across the desk, I'm getting ready to graduate high school. How do you do this for a living? And she ended up, just by total chance, being the national vice president for D.R. Horton. And so she said, So she said, I've seen you in here a couple times. Why don't you come in and interview for me? So I did. She hired me as a sales assistant. I stayed with the organization for about 7 years, did everything from, sales on the floor to creating the first online sales program with websites, and web leads for, the very first program in the whole country for any home builder.
That's awesome.
It was fun. And all the way up into management. And then when I got pregnant with my son, the market had crashed and you could sit in your model home for 3 weeks at a time and not see a human being. So I reactivated my resale license and went into REO, which is about as different as you can get from brand new, bright, shiny homes to foreclosures. And I did about 15 to 20 million a year in REO for a couple of years until that kind of dried up and changed. That's the great thing about real estate. Once you are stable, it changes. And now I've been on the resale side ever since.
That's awesome. So talk to me about, and I want to share with you a theory I have, but give me a second. Talk to me about your world right now. Like, what does your world look like? Are you a solo practitioner? You run a team? Because I know you're doing a lot industry-wise. I know the Real Homegirls podcast is, I think, 9 million downloads, which is massive.
Yeah.
So talk about kind of your real estate world. Talk about your real world, like your day-to-day, and then also talk a little bit about your digital world.
Yeah. So at this point in time, my team is kind of small but mighty. I have run everything up to about 30 people on my team. About 3 years ago, I decided to kind of break that down and go back to the basics and perfect and rebuild the systems. So as of right now, we're about 5 and growing. So I'm in build mode for the year, which is very fun in this climate that we're in with real estate right now. And then digitally, I've been a trainer and a coach and a speaker for about 15 years, and I'm wildly passionate about helping and coaching and training other real estate agents. I have said for most of my career that real estate is kind of an island and it's very isolating. And if you can't get plugged into a network with a good mentor, a good brokerage, good people helping you, it can be really difficult. And so, I just have never wanted people to be out on that island on their own. And so the podcast kind of came about with several girlfriends who are also top producers, and we just liked spending time with each other, and we all had a passion for education, and we love doing it. It's been absolutely crazy to see the response that we've had. Really fun and rewarding.
How long has the podcast been going?
We are going in, it'll be 3 years next month in March.
So, and starting out, were you getting 10 listeners and then it went to 30? And then what was the hockey stick moment for that podcast? Because on average now, when you put out a podcast, what is your downloads? Like how many listeners are you guys getting now?
Yeah, I mean, I think we accidentally did a very good job. I have a marketing degree. I love marketing. I'm very passionate about it. So, I came into it with a marketing brain, but we were accidentally very purposeful in choosing the right guests to be with us in the beginning. And so we had more guts than brains, I think. And we just started messaging all of the top people in the industry, anyone that we would have loved to have learned from and listened to. And most of them were very generous with their time and agreed to come and do the show with us. And so that helped with that kind of exponential growth, the fact that they all shared it with their spheres as well and their listeners as well. But it really started to take off, I would say maybe like third quarter of last year. And I think it's just that time on task over time. The statistic I think says that like 99% of podcasts don't ever get past episode 10. And we're over 100 episodes in. So I think it's, just that repetition of doing it over and over and over again. And just putting out solid content that people have wanted to hear.
So is it fair to call myself a top 10 podcast just by making it to episode number 11? Like if I do one more, I'm in the top 10%. That's awesome.
Yes, you actually would be. That is fair. Yes.
Well, so let me share with you my theory, because going back to your origin story of getting into real estate, I believe, and statistically speaking, the number one clicked upon image on the internet is attractive people. Number two are pictures of homes and all the various things that go along with it. Shout out to Chip and Joanna Gaines and the Property Brothers and, fix it or flip it or whatever. Like, I think our world is obsessed with an ideal lodging. It's one of our, key human necessities is a roof over our head. And then number three is food. And I always like to say that the only advantage I have in the world is number two. I don't have great looks. I'm not a great cook, but I sell real estate, so it kind of gives me an advantage. But then you talking about getting into the real estate industry, I think there's so many people like you where yours was a very tangible entry, right? Like you were physically showing up and looking at properties and parade of homes and new home sales centers and going like, I want to be a part of this world. Now people are doing that digitally. So yes. What is, your podcast, I'm sure dives into a lot of this, but talk a little bit about the focus of the podcast. And is it specifically, because it's the Real Homegirls podcast, specifically geared toward women in real estate practitioners in general? Like what is the theme or the goal of the podcast?
Great question. So, our audience is about 90% female, and it is about 95% real estate agents or lenders, people in the industry, title folks that are listening to us. I am always shocked by the amount of men that we have that listen and engage with us, which is really fun. But because you guys, in all fairness, you are number one talking about the number two. I mean, like a bunch of pretty girls talking about real estate, and everyone's like, okay, so they're pretty, and they're talking about number two. The fact that it's a podcast might hurt you guys a little bit, but you guys are taking now. If you end it with a segment on food, like it would be the triple threat. We may have to incorporate that and watch our ratings go way up. But I think it was really born out of this feeling that there wasn't a lot of authenticity in the industry. So, I think all of us grew up in this world, and it's changing now, which is awesome. But we all grew up in this world where we idolized these people, men and women, who stood on stage and in a roundabout way kind of all talked about maybe like the same 5 topics. They would put their spin on it, but it was very curated. Those personalities were very curated. Not to say that we don't love and still idolize all of those people because they're brilliant, but it just felt like a lot of stage talk. And, we wanted to talk about what being an entrepreneur is really like, and what it's really like to build a business, to stay in business, and especially what it's really like to be women in business, moms, wives, balancing all those different balls, and how some take priority over others. And, so that's why it's the Real Homegirls podcast, because it's very candid. And that has been kind of a learning curve for all of us to get used to being so candid in our conversations. When we have guests on, we've frequently had guests say things to us like Jeff Cohn, who is one of those people that I have idolized my whole life, said, I've never said any of these things in an interview before, and we've had other guests say things to us like, it just feels really safe to talk to you guys. And so I'm more candid than I normally would be. We have definitely had guests who have said, we love what you guys are doing, but we won't come on the show because there are not questions that are approvable by someone's PR team or someone's assistant up front, and it is very, very real. I mean, we talk about how does being so driven affect your life and your family and all of that stuff. Right. So, we just really wanted to kind of break down the veil, I guess, a little bit of like the reality in the industry versus what you're seeing on the stage.
Well, so speak to that, because I literally 10 minutes before you and I hopped on this conversation was talking to an individual who is entering into that influencer space, podcast, social influence, stuff like that. And our conversation was very much centered around, I've always believed that we, meaning like myself and my business partner, our business is so much better than we've ever been able to portray to people. Mm. Like, there are people who pretend production. We've always been production people. Yeah, we've always been production people. But then I'm like, we're just not good at telling our story.
Yeah.
So how do you balance? Because you're actually doing great business. You're actually a killer when it comes to real estate production, but you're an influencer. And so it's like, we all know real estate agents who pose on the front of other people's Maseratis and take pictures in other people's Ferraris and other people's backyards. They take pictures at quote unquote parties when it's like them and their friend, they get dressed up and make it seem like they're somewhere. Like, we know that exists. So how much is things as they really are broadcasting themselves into a podcast or a social media? Like, you and I are friends on Facebook, and I'm like, she delivers such great content, and you can tell that it comes from a place of authenticity and actuality, but our industry is plagued with the desire to create the fake. I don't know. That's kind of I need to get off my soapbox, but talk on that, because you more than I deal with this, because you are killing it in the digital space and you're killing it in the actual space. So it's like, how do you balance those?
Well, I think that was what you're saying is the exact point of the show. I mean, I think we all felt like, and I will only speak for myself because it's just me here and my partners aren't here with me, but, we all felt like I was in an organization for 17 years in my career that I love so much. And it really changed my life. It changed my world. It gave me so many opportunities. But at the same time, at some point, I realized that I was modeling my life and modeling my business after these people who I really didn't know anything about. And I was killing myself, and I was hurting my marriage, and I was hurting my relationship with my kids. And this theme is extremely common among everyone that I've ever talked to who will speak candidly about what we do for a living. It's the curse of being successful, right? And at one point, I think all of us just kind of said, why is no one talking about this? Like, why is no one talking about the fact that we did 300 units last year, but my house is such a mess that I'm like terrified to go home? Or why is no one talking about the fact that, we did 300, 400, whatever, how many millions of dollars last year, but we don't feel good and we don't know what we do next year because, we've made it to the top of the mountain and it's not as fulfilling as we thought it would be. No one's really talking about what it takes to get there, what you sacrifice to get there, And so I think that was the whole point, is we were sick of seeing people in the Lamborghinis and in the Ferraris and not at home in the mess. It just felt really inauthentic. And I think it's important for the number one thing that we've heard over and over again about the show is all these people have come to us and said, the show makes me feel less alone because I didn't realize that, that it's messy. I thought I was the only one that was a mess. And so I thought that I wasn't succeeding at the level that all these other people were because I'm a mess. But I didn't realize that everyone else is kind of a mess too. No one talks about it.
Wow. Have you ever met somebody and you're like, well, we became friends really quick, and then you get to know them better and you're like, actually, this is awesome because they're really rad? Like, as you were talking, I felt like one of those memes of people at church or at the Oprah show, like standing up and applauding, because that is, I think maybe because one of my kryptonites, like one of my weaknesses is telling my story. Now, people that follow me are like, yeah, all you do is talk. But I struggle to really convey, like when I talk about, I love my real estate team, like our agents are amazing. Everybody says that. So I'm always like, how do I say it in a way that people will actually believe? And that is the struggle, right? Because we've been to events where it's like when somebody gets off stage and they're like, dude, you killed it. They're like, yeah, but my admin staff sucks, or my wife's leaving me. And you're like, well, you didn't say any of that up there, And so it is kind of cool to peel back the curtain and share what is like things. One of my favorite talks, it's kind of a spiritual talk, but it's talks about the danger of the digital world. Mm-hmm. And how much, like, one of my favorite episodes of The Office is Dwight. Have you ever watched The Office? Were you an Office person?
Yes.
Okay. So you remember when Dwight created himself in Second Life, and his real life became crappy. So he just like lives in Second Life because that's, and then you find out Jim that is like a guitar player and stuff. Anyways, I think people like you who can tell their story as it really is, the good and the bad, become highly magnetized because everybody goes like, she gets it. She gets what it's like to be me. Right. And I think that's the desire of any good, true influencer. Like when you talk about influencers, people talk about influence as if it's something to be capitalized on. Mm-hmm. The reality is, influencing others is a responsibility. It's not something that you just make money from. Like if you really want to be an influencer, you have to actually help people. And I think that's what's so cool about what you guys are doing, is you're actually influencing people's lives for the good. Yeah. So much of what we call influencers on social is making people feel like crap because they don't look like, live like, vacation like them, where you guys are influencing, but from a position of actually helping people understand there's people out there that understand their world, which I think is cool.
I think the culture is changing, and I'm really glad to see it start happening. But the way that influencer culture came out, and like, again, I love these guys. I follow them. I would kill to have them on our show. They're amazing. But we saw like Gary Vaynerchuk and Grant Cardone come out on the scene, and people like that who, they were standing in front of private jets, and it was like this hustle, grind message. And even they are starting to pull that back and say things like leverage so that you can have a life. Hustle when it means something, authenticity is important. So I do think that influencer culture, and it feels really weird to hear you call me an influencer, so thank you. It's changing for the better, but it's harmful. I mean, I can't tell you, there was definitely a point in my career where Again, in the organization that I was with, the peak was getting to this one private mastermind group that everyone knows what it is, right? It's top with a number after it. And I spent 10 years of my life, and that was like my sole and only goal, was getting there. And I got there and I made it in the room, and it was absolutely incredible. I learned an amazing amount of things, but I left feeling awful because I finally made it to that pinnacle that I'd killed myself for 10 years. And there were people in the room who were doing 500 times more than I was doing. And it just still made me feel subpar, So it's just so interesting how, for some bizarre reason, real estate is just this icky culture of comparison. Like, we can't stop comparing ourselves to other people. And, then I sat back and thought, well, how many of those people in that room have good marriages, have good relationships with their kids? How many of them are happy? And it's not that many of them sometimes, right? And so I think we have to be careful thinking about what exactly we're modeling after and what we want, Ideally we get to the top of the mountain and we have a life that we love.
Yeah. Well, talk about this. Like, if you were to say your superpower is blank, like what do you do really, really well in the practice of real estate? Like, what is your superpower?
I think that my superpower is connecting with other human beings on a really deep level. So, I think that enables me to have a wonderful sphere of influence that I get to work with. It enables me to have a lot of referrals in my business, and it enables me to have really close relationships with people on my team, people that I get to work with, and teach them how to do that also. So I'm just a big time lover of people. I think if I had a superpower, that would probably be it. I love people.
That's awesome. Well, I would think numerous people on the earth who've ever lived, the great philosophers, would say, like, if you can truly love people, that is a talent. Well, so some people struggle with that one, and it's very much easier to go on to the next one, which is, what is your weakness? Like, what do you lack? Where when you look at your business and say, man, 2022, I've got people work down on lock. Man, this is my weakness. What part of the industry do you struggle with?
Leadership. Which everyone that comes on my show, again, that whole idolizing people thing. Like, I look at people like you and I go, man, Joe, you just must have like woke up the day you were born and been a natural leader. Right. For me, because I do love
my wife would say no, absolutely not. But yeah,
it's, because I do love people so much and I do form those really close relationships with people. It's very difficult for me to not be a yes man and to hold people accountable. And also because I've just been a very driven person my whole life. You never have to tell me to do something more than one time. It's hard for me to deal with people who aren't built that way. So I would say continuing to learn how to be a good leader is probably the thing that scares me the most, that I'm always trying to figure out.
Yeah. So what's your goal for 2022? What are some things you're looking to accomplish? Looking back on December 31st, 2022, you say this year was a success because I blank. Like, what are some of the things you're working on?
So obviously I have transactional and GCI and volume goals. I also have made a big change in my brokerage life. And so I'm really excited about being able to kind of wrap my arms around more people and try to bring as many people as I can off of that island and continue building this authentic community. And I also am taking 2 international vacations, which I'm really excited about because I'm not a very good flyer. So it's
where are you going?
I'm going to St. Lucia for one trip, and then I'm going to Mexico for with spring and with a group of all of us. So those are big personal things for me, which sounds really silly, but I'm not great on an airplane. So
Well, so talk about the transition you made. You and I came in contact with each other because of this transition, but what attracted you to the business model that you ended up in? Like, why change, right? Like, why upset the apple cart? Why transition brokerages? Like, what did you see about where you are now that kind of led you into that direction?
Yeah, I mean, I think that every agent, if they're lucky enough to get the tenure in the business, to be able to stay in the business long enough, they get to the point where they kind of realize that the brokerage doesn't really make that big of an impact on their daily production life, right? So you go to brokerages hoping that they're going to help you do more things and be more things. And really it's you at the end of the day, wherever you are, that has to put in the work and do the work, right? But what I like about this opportunity is that there are just really amazing people building this really amazing culture that I think we need desperately. So, the statistic is like 82% of all real estate agents fail in the first 2 years and leave the business. That is not, in my opinion, because they're bad real estate agents or bad business owners. I think it's either because they're not being led to know how to make it financially through the first 2 or 3 years, or it's because they're on that island and they're totally alone. So to see so many people who have so much clout and are so respected in this industry kind of all coming together to collaborate is not something that I've ever seen before. And I love that. And I think it will help a ton of people. And I just really wanted to be a part of that. I would like my legacy to be more than just how many houses I sold or a team sold this year.
So I love that you said that. When I was in Tahiti, I don't know if you and I have ever talked about this or not, but so we were always independent brokerage people. We owned 2 brokerages. And we would just always kept our head down, probably partly out of conceit and partly out of envy. It's like, if we look too much at other people, we're gonna get jealous. And if like we're so cocky that we'll just keep going, like, right. So it was like somewhere probably we kept swinging back and forth. So when I was in Tahiti, the island we were on was called Moorea, like MO'OOR or something like that. Moorea. The island of Moorea is the pineapple island. And so we went on this tour on our 4-wheelers and the guy said, "We make the pineapples." We're like, "Okay, like, where do you get meat from?" And they're like, "Oh, the meat island is that island. And the sugar island is that island. And the rice island is that island." And so, I mean, obviously they've probably matured agriculturally and more diverse on each island now. But in its inception years ago, when James Cook landed in Tahiti, he would have found islands that operated as a network where they were all strong in different things, and then they all supported each other. So what happens now that you and I are collaborating together, and I'm doing some really cool stuff, and so are you. And so we do something real estate agents are terrible at. We share with each other with no cost or obligation the things we do well. And then all of a sudden you become a little stronger, I become a little stronger. I have clients that move to Colorado. We work together to put them in a good situation. You have clients that move to Vegas. And I think that's the world that I didn't really know existed, because I've just been like a horse with blinders on, focused on my own thing. And so I think it's cool that you talk about that collaboration. I've heard it described a whole bunch of different ways. I've been big on collaboration over competition. Somebody the other day on a call talked about a brokerage without borders.
Yeah.
Like, what happens when it's not about our 4 walls anymore? It's not even about our state lines. It's not even about our country lines. Yeah. Like, we connect with rad people, we collaborate, and we build something awesome together. Well, Lindsay, I'm so glad you hopped on. I'm very excited about the year 2022. And when I'm sitting there December 31st with my sparkling cider next to my kids, and I'm saying 2022 was a success, I think part of it will be because I got to collaborate with you and build something awesome. And I'm so excited to work together. So thanks for hopping on.
Oh, I'm so honored to be here, and I can't wait. It's very, very exciting. Thank you so much.